Good morning. We're here at the Utah Board of Water Resources Board Briefing Meeting. Quickly, we have excused William Merkley and Tim Hawks, won't be joining us today, and then remotely we'll have Dana Van Horn and Blaine Ibsen. Welcome, everyone. Congratulations, Blaine.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
He's retiring. Okay, let's introduce the board real quickly. I'm the chair, Mike Davis, representing Provo Drainage.
Thank you. Juliet Tenner, representing Salt Lake and Tooele.
Spencer Jones, representing the lower Colorado River.
Brian Steed, representing Great Salt Lake.
Thank you so much. I'll turn the time over to Candace. Dana and Blaine, excuse me, please.
I'm Dana Van Horn. I represent the Upper Colorado.
I'm Blaine Ibsen. I represent the Sevier River system.
Now, Candace.
Great. Candace Hosnager, Director at Water Resources. With us today and staff is Joel Williams, Shalane DiBernardi, Todd Stoneley, Tom Cox, Ben Marett, Bradley Caldwell, Jessica Chen, Eric Dixon, Aaron Austin, Justine Jedica. Gonna get it? Thank you. Our AG, Sarah Schechter. Shawnee White is doing our minutes. Thank you, Shawnee. And behind the curtain, as always, Seth Majors and Carmen McDonald's doing a great job. And I believe online, Marisa Egbert is joining us remotely.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive into the good stuff, I guess. Anything on the minutes? Were you able to look through them that we need to be made aware of? Board. Okay. I don't see anything. Let's go into the fees. Oh, that's right. We need a motion. We will need a motion.
I will make that motion.
Brian, thank you. Candace is over here cueing me very appropriately. Thank you. So let's look at feasibility reports. And Tom, looks like you're on to inform us, enlighten us, and get us ready.
He's getting ready. He's sitting down. You just settle in.
Well, I figure if this is a 2-hour meeting and this is the only project, I'll want to sit down. So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, today we'll be discussing a project with Washington County Water Conservancy District, a reuse project that they're proposing. Cost estimate of $1.39 billion. Yes, that's with a B, billion. It's going to be a multi-phase project with construction that's already started on some of the parts and will extend up into maybe the 2020 or 2040 time period. Just a little bit of introduction in the district's service area and what they do. Of course, they provide wholesale water for the most part to the whole Washington County area. Last year, I believe they diverted and supplied about 52,000 acre feet of water. They have a system encompasses reservoirs, pipelines, storage, treatment plants, hydroelectric plants. It's a large variety of things. So, of course, Washington County is still one of the fastest growing parts of the state, and the district is tasked with coming up with water to supply that growth. And they've come up with a 20-year plan for water projects to supply water for that demand. Currently, there's good quality untreated water that's being used for agriculture and secondary residential irrigation. And so that they have that good quality available, and there's other supplies that they're treated. And so it's, there's an opportunity to take that treated water and use it for the irrigation purposes. They're estimating that by the year 2042, will be about 24,000 acre feet of reuse of treated water that could be used for reuse purposes in those agriculture, residential purposes, and use the better quality water for drinking water. So kind of an exchange situation. So the district will be coming to the board with a project that will include about 60 miles of pipeline, 3 reservoirs and other storage facilities, new and upgraded water reclamation facilities, and an advanced water purification facility that would be able to treat water for drinking water standards. So the project is, in your report, has been broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 generally includes the infrastructure needed to provide the reuse water for irrigation. This includes the Chief Toker Dam, which is under construction, the pipeline from that reservoir to the existing systems, and also under construction is a water treatment facility that's being constructed by the Ash Creek Special Service District. So in the county, there are mainly 2 entities that treat wastewater. St. George City has a large regional treatment plant, and Ash Creek Special Service District has a lagoon system that treats water in that way. And a little bit of both of those systems provide reuse water for irrigation currently. The St. George system, they have another smaller treatment plant that treats water further to enable it to be used for what they call type 1 water, which is water that can be used, reuse water that can be used for irrigation purposes. So there's about 3,000 to 4,000 acre feet from that's put into the existing systems in the area and used for irrigation. The Ash Creek system, they take about 700 acre feet of water and put it on ag ground just adjacent to the lagoons. So part of the project is to make improvements that the Ash Creek folks are going to build their own water reclamation facility, and water from that will be put into the system, the new system that's being proposed by the district. Okay, phase 2 will include the infrastructure needed for additional storage and an advanced water purification system so water could be used for drinking water purposes. And that includes a 21 million gallon per day advanced water purification facility, a Warner Valley Dam and reservoir, which could store up to 55,000 acre feet of water, and pipelines to connect those facilities to the systems. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's being proposed. In your report, the cost estimate is broken down. The phase 1 cost estimate, which is just the irrigation part of it. The cost estimate is about $413 million. Phase 2, which has the advanced water treatment facilities, that's about $947,000 for a total of $1,360 million. So it's being proposed that Water Resources authorize the use of $195 million to the project, and that's being suggested it be used for the phase one work. And those funds come from the wire account that the legislature set up, and they've recently amended the rules concerning that account to allow for $195 million to be used towards improvements on projects on the Colorado River drainage. So that's $45 million the first year and $50 million for subsequent years till that $195 million is obtained. So if you look in your report, excuse me, the cost sharing and repayment that's shown is just based on the phase one cost, because that's where all of the $195 million will be used. So that $195 million is 14 point. Whoops, I'm looking at the wrong chart. In the report I put in the total cost share or cost sharing for the total project, the $1.36 billion project, and then also a chart for just the phase one work, and that's what the board's recommendation will be based on today. So of that $413 million of phase one costs, the board will provide 47.2%. The district has come up with grants, ARPA grants and reclamation grants, and they're willing to come up with about $124 million, and that leaves a hole to be filled of about $57 million. They're currently looking at the best options. They have options to borrow money from the WIFIA account, which is a federal loan program, and also through the public market. So what staff is recommending their board motion today is to authorize 47.2% of the phase one project costs up to $195 million, and that the bonded indebtedness be returned at 1% interest over 30 years with annual payments of approximately $787,844,000, and that includes reserves. And just an explanation of how we came up with that cost share. In the financial feasibility section, we discussed the board's affordability guideline, which is based on the area's median adjusted gross income, based on a weighted average of the different cities and the incomes in those cities. According to the board's affordability guideline, residents could pay up to $60.25 per connection per month for water. So if you look at the chart, water users have a water bill, they pay property tax on water, and there will be an increased operation and maintenance costs. And we're assuming that to cover the hole in their funding, they will need to get the loans from somewhere. So we just assumed a 3% loan over 25 years, and that payment's thrown in, plus the board's proposed payment. You take all those costs, and that comes down to per connection, $75 or $79.66 per connection per month. So that's what their costs will be. So since that is above the board's affordability guideline, usually indicates that they are eligible for a lower interest rate and a lot longer repayment period. So that's the funding part. And I think I will stop there and answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. One is the cost per connection, the $79.66, is that in addition, or is that taken into account their current rate structure?
Those are the costs. So an average water bill is $49.58. So yeah, that is current, and currently they're paying about the $12.50 per month for property tax. So those are current figures.
Okay.
And it's indicating that doesn't even really take into account what the rate structure from the district is. That's just showing what the costs for water are in the area.
Okay, and then I just had one other question. The minus 50 million of the gap funding. I've only been part of the board for a couple of years now, so I might need just a little bit of information as far as before we commit these funds. I guess we can go ahead and move forward today if the board decides to, but just making sure that the funds, the first draw isn't distributed until that 50 million's figured out, of how that's going to be obtained, just so that their budget can be, or their project can be completed. So
I guess there are a couple comments I need to make. If you look at the cost estimate, there are 18 line items, and those by themselves could be an individual project. And so those will be built as the water demand warrants. So they don't need to have all those things built, because that they can build it in steps. And though they're listed in the cost estimate kind of chronologically on how the water will be used. So like if they build the Chief Toker Dam and the pipeline that connects it to the system, that'll supply the system for a while. And then they'll need to add more facilities. So there's really no need to have them take complete requirements for all of those items before we can start releasing funds.
okay.
We can start releasing funds for the things that they've taken care of, and we can only, normally the board will only release funds for parts of a project that are fully designed, have had a bid opening. So obviously the Chief Toker Dam and the pipeline, they're under construction now. So those projects, that's been done. And as the other features, the designs are finished and the bids are opened and they start construction, then we can start releasing funds towards those parts too. But yeah, you're right. We're not going to just give them $195 million on the day that we close the bonds.
Mr. Chair, if I might, just one additional point in kind of the stage in which the board is at is this is for authorization. So there's still a number of steps before they'll come back to the board for committal of funds. So this is just kind of your first look at it after Tom has done the feasibility study that is provided here for you.
Yeah, so the thinking is the board can authorize the total amount, and we can have multiple bond closings on different parts as those facilities are needed, under planned, and start under construction.
So I have a question on this, and might be towards Candace a little bit. It's a big project, to say the least. One of the largest undertaken in the state. I assume the legislature's on board to continue our funding, so that this is a big draw on us. I mean, we don't want to run the well dry for the rest of the state, and I assume that everybody's synced and on board before we do this.
Yeah, that's why the legislature approved the $195 million
Okay.
from the WIFIA account.
Or the WIRA.
WIRA, oh,
WIRA.
sorry, yeah. Too many acronyms in this project. The WIRA account, and for the purpose of the improvements on the Colorado River. That does not affect our regular funding program.
Okay.
It is just
That's
that.
kind of where I'm looking at on that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If I may, I'm kind of a question, but also just really underlying this point. I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. Like, the way this works is these funds truly are restricted essentially to these projects. And the legislature for many years has actually been directing funds towards this type of project. And so these are, even though they're in the, are they technically C and D? They're not really, like, that's almost just, as I understand it, I'm kind of validating. I'm saying that's more administrative than anything else. It's that the legislature has earmarked, maybe I'm using the wrong term, but they've restricted the funds to this particular use. They're earmarked for this use. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I might. So just a little bit of background, and I know you guys, a lot of you are familiar with this. So the state uses two different 1/16 sales tax for water, one of which is earmarked for a lot of things, including UDAF, water rights, but it also is the dam safety funds. It also goes into the C&D. There's an endangered species component program that's part of that, and I'm happy to provide that chart to you guys. The other 1/16 was a fund that was transferred over, or a sales tax piece that was transferred over originally from transportation. And the legislature earmarked it for three purposes. One is for the Bear River development and Lake Powell, and the other is the Lake Powell pipeline, and the third is for the repair and replacement of federal infrastructure. So we know the federal government is kind of getting out of the process of maintaining and building and maintaining dams. So we kind of set that up. The legislature set that up a number of years ago. In 2023, when they passed HB 280, they started this transition between moving funds for the WIRA into the C&D, and they created a fourth reason in which the WIRA can be used, and that's for this really water reuse in the Colorado River Basin type projects. And they have lots of requirements and restrictions in our code on those funds. So Washington County has met all of those requirements and restrictions as far as conservation. To be honest, the legislature didn't necessarily have to transfer this into the C&D fund. They chose to do that. They could have given us authorization out of WIRA just to spend it out of WIRA. Whatever reason they chose to transfer it, but in Shalane's status of funds that she'll go through, she has kind of separated this from the C&D funds, or a new bucket within the C&D bucket of these specific Colorado River reuse funds.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yes, please.
So following up on that, Candace, thank you for explaining that, because that actually even enlightened me a little bit more on kind of understanding the differences. What I'm trying to think through is how we treat like the interest and the time period. So we're kind of approaching this as we maybe would for as we would for other things. And just, can you talk to us a little bit about the 1% and the 30 years? Did the legislature signal to us in any way, like, should we charge interest? At what level should we be charging interest? Again, because these are, in my thinking, these are a little bit different than the other ones.
Yeah. And Mr. Chair, I'll just add, and then I'll turn it over to Shalane and Tom. The board has guidelines in which staff follows, part of your rules, that we come up with the staff recommendations on that based on your guidelines and rules. That being said, you guys can have the ability to make adjustments to those. At the end of your rules, it says pretty much the board can do whatever they want within all legalities. Making sure everything's legal, but I'll turn it over to Shalane and Tom.
So if I could chime in, I actually, because there have been questions about this, I pulled up the code this morning, thought I don't know that we've ever actually discuss the specifics of the code with you regarding this funding, the projects that these are for. If you don't mind, it's fairly short. I'll just read it to you. The specific code that was added to the WIRA that says,
Will you provide the reference?
so it is code 73-10G-104, subsection 4. A project that benefits the Colorado River drainage in Utah, including projects for water reuse, desalinization, building of dams, or water conservation, if a county or municipality that benefits from the project A, requires a new residential subdivision follow the regional conservation level of 0.59 acre feet, regardless of whether the outside water is potable, reuse, or secondary. B, adopts and implements the local water conservancy district's emergency drought contingency plan. C, adopts and implements the local water conservancy district's grass rebate program's maximum grass restrictions. D, prohibits grass in new retail, industrial, or commercial facility landscaping. E, has reuse water be managed by the local water conservancy district. F, does not withdraw water from an aquifer in excess of the safe yield of the aquifer as defined in section 73-5-15. G, adopts and implements excess water use surcharges. H, prohibits private water features in new development, such as a fountain, pond, or ski lake. And I, prohibits large grassy areas in new development unless the large grassy area is open to the general public. So that's what was specifically written to fund these projects with WIRA funds. And then they moved these funds, transferred them to the C&D fund, and so we are treating them as regular C&D funds. But then I found in the code this morning, and I was glad I did because I wasn't aware of this before, that regarding these specific funds, that notwithstanding the other code according to the Conservation and Development Fund, so this is now in 73-10-25 that discusses the C&D fund specifically. It says, notwithstanding subsection 1 above that talks about what the funds can be used for, the division shall transfer a payment on a loan to the WIRA infrastructure restricted account created in 73-10G-103 if the loan A is issued from the Water Resources Conservation and Development Fund on or after July 1st of 2023, and B, relates to a project described in subsection 73-10G-104 subsection 4, which is the one I just read you. So Colorado River drainage projects funded with this money goes back to the WIRA. Repayments go back to the WIRA.
And any interest if they pay interest. And as I'm looking at this, it looks like the WIRA does earn its own interest in the, yeah, okay. I don't know, I've got to just think about all this, but that's all very helpful, thank you.
Yes. And so I don't know that there's anything requiring a certain interest rate, but it is the board's guideline to charge interest on C&D funds. I will say they have gone as low, and Tom knows, because for primarily a dam safety loan that was needed, as 0.1%. So that has been offered before.
Chair, I just had a question. Is this where we talk about the request of like a line of credit kind of revolving thing? Or
Love to,
Okay.
sure. We, I don't know if Tom wants to address, they actually have several requests. They sent a PowerPoint to us. They plan to present to you during the board meeting, requesting more favorable terms. And yes, essentially this funding being set up as sort of a line of credit.
And just with that, Mr. Chair, I would also add, there was some questions from our finance manager, whether that was even something we could do. So as far as the line of credit piece, I think we as staff need to do more investigation into what even the feasibility is there, unless Shalane has more updated information.
I did I did consult our bond attorney this morning. So the way the district put it to us was that they wanted this to somehow be set up with a revolving structure that they could repay some funds and then reuse those funds for additional projects in this entire project that we're looking at. But so we're considering it like they're asking for a line of credit. So
I'm not quite understanding that 195 million for a project we've looked at, but they're saying as they repay that back, the 7 point something million per year, then they would want to borrow additional funds back above the 195 million
well,
for other projects.
the way they have worded it is their funding request is to have a revolving structure so what is paid back annually can be drawn down again for later project costs. And they gave this example: draw down 50 million in year 1, pay back 40 million in year 2, draw down 90 million in year 3. So they're able to make a big repayment in year 2, then reuse those funds in year 3.
But we're approving the 195 million.
That's how we look at it. And that's why this was a very strange request to me, because this seems to be asking for 195 million to use over and over and over again as often as they can.
Like
in
giving them
whatever-
a box of checks and just say, just write in what you need, as long as you keep paying it back.
And then they added that they would like their repayment schedule set based on the outstanding principal. But I really don't know how we would do that on a bond. Our bond attorney did respond that,
Do you want to mention their other request on the other terms, and then you can?
sure,
go with it?
yes. So they are also asking for a 0.5% interest rate and a 50-year repayment term to match what was in the Lake Powell pipeline repayment term.
So the Lake Powell pipeline was 0.550.
I don't know that it was 0.5.
It was 50 years and then.
But I
interest to be
think
determined.
the way the code is written, and this is
Yeah,
the one
I
code I
remember
didn't
this.
look up. I believe it's a not to exceed a 50-year repayment term.
Okay.
However, our bond attorney, so when I asked our bond attorney about this, his response was this: although this is an unusual request, I believe that a bond could be structured to accomplish what they're suggesting. However, there are a number of issues that would need to be addressed, including the following. How long would the borrower be able to draw down on this line of credit? The bonding statute indicates that the maximum repayment term must be no later than 40 years from the date of issuance of the bond. How would the payment schedule be structured if the amount of the bond would fluctuate from time to time? Would the borrower be precluded from issuing additional bonds for so long as this bond remains outstanding? What would the borrower be required to supply in order to draw down the funds? As Tom mentioned, for each portion, each separate individual project, they'll be required to meet all the legal requirements that are currently set up for a bond, which is final plans and specs approved. The bidding process has been according to statute, that their attorney can opine that that has happened and that they have met all their requirements. They have all permits, easements, rights of way, et cetera. And that the revenue is sufficient to make their payments that are set up. So while he says there might be a way to structure a bond this way, I don't know how the board would do that. I don't know. And
Okay, I've got another question, and it's an understanding thing on my part. I understand this is a different type of fund.
mm-hmm,
I get that. That's an appropriation from the legislature
right,
with no particular guidelines as to interest rate on repayment
right.
and so forth. But what would our standards be if it wasn't that, if it was just C&D fund and our standards? what interest rate would we then charge?
I think just what Tom prepared.
Okay, I assumed that was the case, but I
Yes.
wanted to know that.
And I'm
Yes.
going to check this too, just for myself. I know my colleague said, you've been around for a couple of years and you're still getting things. And I've been around for more than a couple of years, and I still always have to. I'm still learning. Again, these are consistent with our guidelines, and they're more quote unquote favorable because of the affordability.
Correct.
Okay,
The
thank you.
affordability guidelines, yes.
Well, what would it be if they were not? What would the percent be if
If they were
did not meet
below the affordability guideline, our current interest rates have risen, as I'm
Yeah,
sure
that's-
you're all
yeah.
aware. While the current,
This is more of a just for general
No,
purposes, not even necessarily this particular project. that I'm
so the current rate we've been working with is 3.33. However, that will be updated this week. Whatever's in effect on July 1st works for the next quarter. That rate looks to be right now about 4.16%.
Thanks, Shalene.
Mr. Chair, if I might add to a little bit of, maybe this is confusion. So this whole aspect of some sort of line of credit is very new to me. The first time I heard about it was yesterday. So I do think that's something that we have to give more thought to and consideration. One of the things that I had talked to Shalane about, and I'm sure they can remind me, is this is a massive project, right? And the board, they're coming to a board for a fraction of what they need for the overarching project. And it made me think of, I believe it was for Metro, when we did an interstate buy down, right? Where we offered a really favorable low interest rate because we were just providing a fraction, and then the total interest rate was kind of pulled down. And I can't remember what that rate was that we provided to Metro, what the board provided to Metro, but that's kind of how I'm thinking of it is and there, we haven't used those words, but that's what it reminded me of based on their ask. And I'm not saying the board has to go that way, but that's just kind of how I thought of it.
Yeah, and if I might, I believe the interest rate we offered was 1% to buy them to a net effective rate of about 3%.
That sounds right.
If I'm
With-
remembering
yeah,
correctly.
With the others, yeah.
So,
That's helpful.
Okay, so again, my peanut mind is still trying to work through all this. Legislature appropriates $195 million specifically for this type of project, but you got to know that that's the project.
Yeah.
It's not specifically said this is going to that district, but the number matches, everything matches, which is fine. As it's paid back, it goes into the WIRA fund. I assume in the future there will be other projects qualifying for the WIRA fund at some point. Some may be very large. Some could be as large or larger. If we don't get those funds back to become available for that, then we have to go to the legislature and appropriate another amount of money, which may or may not happen depending on lots of things. So that my hesitancy is that the concept of having the WIRA fund available for these types of projects in the future depends significantly at this point on the repayment from the $195 million. And without that, or the ability to utilize that, in other words, if it were reused, if it was just an open line of credit, essentially you don't have that to use.
right.
You are basically saying unless the legislature reappropriates an additional large amount of money, there are no future projects to
Right.
anticipate until that happens.
Right, and
That concerns me.
Yes, and I think as staff, it concerns us primarily because this is not a request we've ever heard before. The board provides an amount of money. It's to be repaid in this many years at this interest rate, at repayment terms set by the board, and then memorialized in a bond, a legal document that says what's to be repaid when. And I think all of us struggle to understand how that might work if any of those things could be variable and not set. I think that's where we come across some concern, and the fact that it is tying up these funds and setting them aside specifically for Washington County and whatever purposes they deem appropriate in this process, which I agree is another layer, making them unavailable for any other purpose that is dictated in the WIRA.
But I also think the 195 million, while it is for these qualifications, and certainly in my mind, anticipation of Washington County, but it isn't Washington County. It wasn't specifically
No,
appropriated
it was
to
not.
Washington County.
No, you're right.
And I think that's our obligation then
Yes.
to take it as, to make this fund as solvent as possible for future projects. I guess that's, if it were going to be specifically to Washington County, then they should have appropriated it to them
Right.
as such.
No,
That's
they
not
designated
ours.
Colorado River. They did put all those requirements in there
Yeah,
that
but
I read
Colorado
off.
River
But
goes
yes,
all the way up into
yes, you're
the middle of the
absolutely
state
right.
as
It
far as
does.
we do transfers, and Central Utah is involved in that.
Yes, and I think that's why Dana has her hand up.
Okay. Dana, did you have a question, comment? You're muted?
Yeah, I am. I was. Now I'm not. Sorry. If this is not appropriate time to talk about this, just we can get to it offline. But with the new water infrastructure fund stuff, is our board going to be in charge of these funds in the future? And does it seem prudent to set an entity up with a not the normal plan, and then have it get transferred to drinking water or something, and burden them with something like that? Does that make sense? Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I might. So the WIRA funds, the Water Infrastructure Restricted Account, is not a part of this prioritization process through the Utah Water Infrastructure Plan. So I do, at this point in time, see this set of funding being separate. That's not to say it couldn't become entangled in the future, but I think at this point it is separate.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in for a second?
Please, Brian.
I think it does. I mean, when we're talking WIRA, I mean, I was around for the discussion of this. WIRA itself, I think, was set up with the expectation of two projects, one being the Bear River project, the other being Lake Bell Pipeline, right? Now that those projects seem to be on hold, there's a broader discussion, and I think that we should be reminded that really what they're trying to do here is supplanting Lake Bell Pipeline. And so it meets the intent, I think, what the legislature intended to do. And that's, I think, an important point just to remember as we deliberate this. The second, well, I've got so many questions. One, are there precedents for this type of financial transaction in anywhere in the state by any other board?
None that I am aware of.
And then I ask that because this kind of sets us up to be a bank.
Right.
And I don't
Which
think
I've
that
said-
we are set up to do statutorily. That
No.
it worries me. So that's one. Two, I'm really curious if there's any other indication that we have statutory authority to do this, because I think that we have statutory authority to do exactly what they've told us to do, which is to maybe be a grantor of $195 million.
And
But that seems to be as far as our statutory authority might go.
that's also how I read it, and especially with the specification I pointed out earlier that repayments are to be made to the WIRA, not to come back and
Yeah.
be available for additional C&D projects, that almost was an indication to me that we don't just have discretion to do what we want here. I mean, maybe in terms of term, repayment, interest rate, but I kind of thought the same thing, where if repayments have to go back to the WIRA, they aren't even,
We're not even controlling that at this point.
that's how I see it.
Right. That would have to be a legislative change that we don't, I can't bind the legislature.
Agreed.
None of us on the board can.
Agreed.
Third question I have is, do we have to act on this request now? I mean, I don't know their requirements from the project proponents on whether, if we gave this a month to think about it, whether this is, because this seems like a brand new idea that, in terms of acting as a line of credit. And
Yeah.
listen, I'm not opposed to any of the terms that we've set out in terms of the proposal made by staff today. I'm just trying to figure out if they're coming back to ask us to say, hey, we want you to really be creative on your
Right.
financial lending. I think that's something I think that we can't decide today. I'm just going
Yeah.
to,
And I think, so my suggestion would be, if the board wants to consider this, I mean, today all we're asking for is authorization.
okay,
Staff has a recommendation of terms to be authorized.
okay,
They're going to request something else. The board can authorize either staff's recommendation, a portion of the terms they're requesting, or a hybrid of some sort, or they could table the action entirely. Authorization would at least start the process
starts the
moving, where
process.
they would be notified of the legal requirements they have to meet to start the bonding process before funds could be committed. All of the specifics could be decided at committal of funds after we have more time to review the information, check statute, get all sorts of legal opinions.
okay. Mr. Chair, one last question, actually two questions. So it seems like if we do act on the authorization today, we still have time to reevaluate in terms of the financial instruments that are implied later,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's helpful.
Does that pertain to interest rate and payment
Yes.
and length of
Yes, if
that
you,
and so forth?
if we came to committal of funds and the board, I mean, if today you went with staff's recommendation, let's just say, and you authorized 1% in 30 years, the district might not like that, but if the board decided that's what they wanted, and then over the next couple months, as more information is gathered and we come back to the board for committal of funds, and the board decides, actually, we'd prefer this lower interest rate, longer repayment term, we absolutely can make that change at committal of funds.
So right now, as I understand it, the 1% would be somewhat of a standard that we would use in a different category, but
Yes.
it's what we have,
Right,
and it's something we have done.
yes.
Length of term, same thing, extending past the 40 years, which we're looking at 30, but extending past 40, our bond council saying, you might have some
Yeah,
challenges.
well,
there.
and the bond council is saying statutorily, a bond cannot have a longer repayment than 40 years. Now, there is probably a little bit of way around that if there are multiple bonds. As Tom mentioned before, these could be in multiple bonds. It could be a single bond of $195 million put out in incremental advances, or it could be multiple bonds done over the next few years as each project is ready to come online. Prepare, come for committal of this one project and set the terms for this one, which is maybe, I don't know, 40, 50 million, 80, whatever it might be. It may be, there is still time to decide that. We're asking you to authorize the full 195 million. We're not asking you to commit anything today. And so how we want to handle that in the years coming up. So even if this process is just to use this 195 takes 3-4 years, if you set a 40-year repayment term 4 years from now, that's essentially giving them a 45-year repayment. I mean, sort of, on those funds, because it would be
From time of issuance plus,
right,
plus years.
plus 40.
I'm kind of with Board Member Steed on this, in that getting outside of our lane, so to speak, in this meeting at this time without, I'm very uncomfortable with that.
Yes.
Not to say that maybe there is a way to work through this at some later date, but it doesn't appear that our guidelines, our standards and so forth that we've been using and what we've been asked to use really falls outside of what you've already
Right.
recommended.
Right. And I
So-
will note that the Provo River project, with its large size of the board providing $65 million, was given a 35-year repayment term, right? 35? On their $65 million bond. So the board does occasionally go beyond the
No.
standard 25, 30 years.
But part of that
But-
goes to the affordability
Yes, it does.
components of that, because all of these things have to be repaid at some point.
Yes.
And so that's understandable. And I think it's understandable to say, okay, in concept, we've got something here that's going to work for us. But to start changing all this at this day, this time, I think is, for me, is problematic. Oh, Board Member Van Horn, you have a question?
I do, or just a statement, I guess. I personally don't have an issue with, the 40 years. I mean, it's a lot of money, more than ever, really. But regarding the revolving part of their request, if I'm understanding it correctly, I feel like they could continue to use these funds over and over again, and there's no setup for a progress report or any check-in with the board to request additional funding. So if they used the money twice, they're $400 million they've used out of our funds without checking in. And I think it's our job in a way to make sure that these projects are moving along and that we're using the state allocated taxpayer money that it's being put to a good use, as opposed to them just writing a check and not checking in with us. I feel like that's a little out of what I'm comfortable with. That was my
Thank you.
comment.
Mr. Chair, this is Blaine. I guess where I'm at on this whole thing personally right now is I'm comfortable with staff's recommendation as is. 1%, 30 years. That's within our lane of what we have right now for this. If another entity on the Colorado River comes along and wants money, we're essentially allocating the full 195 million. What if somebody up the river on Colorado River wants some? If we delay this out to 40 years, does that delay the ability to tap into that much longer for somebody else? Yes, this does look like it was earmarked for Washington County to help out with the Lake Powell pipeline project, to kind of implement it through this vehicle. I can see that. But I guess for today's, where it's just a feasibility, I personally am the most comfortable just going with staff's recommendation as is. So that's my thoughts on it anyway right now.
Thank you. Board Member Jones, did you have a question?
Yes, I was just going to bring up, I appreciate what everyone's comments are. One thing I am going to bring up in the next board meeting is I do own one single family home in the service area here, and there might be others of us that have that, but I'm just going to make that for the record. I have no other benefit other than that. But yeah, I think the concept here of the line of credit or the revolving, I think that we need to look at that. And so maybe that's something we can ask the applicant, if that's something that we could take into consideration, deliberate, and come back to our next meeting, or whatever successive meeting, to try to make that determination. as far as the 30 or 40 year, you know, it is a sizable project. I'd be fine going to 40. I mean, that is allowable. I think that makes, you know, quite a difference in the repayment. But also too, I respect what the staff has put together here, so I'm kind of neutral whether it's the 30 or the 40 year. As far as the interest, I'm also okay whether it's the 0.5 or the 1%, just given the size of the project. And so I just wanted to kind of let the board know kind of, you know, what I'm thinking here now. I do agree specifically with what Mr. Steed said. I do feel like that this project is definitely needed. It's the one of the driest, or is the driest, other than maybe Mrs. Van Orm's area. I don't know the difference between those two as far as a precip, but I do think that we do need to try to help support this project. And I think that is what the intent of the legislature was. So I think maybe a good question to ask the applicant here today is you know, if we do deliberate part of this to next meeting, or, you know, something like that, if that's going to be very detrimental for them, or not. And if it is detrimental, then maybe we consider what the staff's recommending here today. So that's all I have.
Board Member Steed.
Thank you so much, Chair. I would also say that I'm a big fan of the project and would be really happy with even moving the interest rate down to 0.5 or the 40-year repayment plan. But I think that we also have to be mindful that we have limits on what we can do, and that's, I mean, we bear the risk on this, I think, and I think it's behooves us to be cautious on it.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add a little bit more information, because of the discussion regarding, you know, we're potentially committing all of these funds for one project. With the water infrastructure restricted account having, you know, those very defined purposes that we talked about, two of which aren't moving forward at this point, the Bear River development and the Lake Powell pipeline. I believe that utilizing these funds versus them sitting in an account is very important, not just for the board, but for, you know, water suppliers that are trying to tackle this. These are Washington County Water Conservancy District, in my opinion, has led the way as far as conservation and are trying to come up with creative financing. And they're trying to do that through a mechanism which the board has never thought or considered, or we don't even know if it's possible. But I do think it's something that as staff we're willing to look into. In FY 2024, there was in the sheet I provided you, approximately nearly $64 million was put into the WIRA account. Right now, the balances of the WIRA account are, and this is with considering the $95 million has been taken out of WIRA, put into our C&D account, is roughly $267 million. So even with another $100 million out of that, there's still 167. So I would say that fund still has a lot of leeway. So if there was a great need for additional reuse projects, federal projects, there's still money in that account that the legislature could move around and allow for more authorization. So I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective. I'm all for rainy day funds and having money available, but I'm also an advocate of making sure that we're putting money to good use and getting good projects in the ground.
And I totally agree with that, but I do see that they are looking for another 900 million. On top of
and Mr.
this,
Chair, I will
a few years.
Yeah, I will say that Washington County has indicated that they would be happy to utilize as much money as the state is willing to offer them, because of your long history of, you know, working with water users and providing funds. I think they definitely would rather go to you than the federal government. That being said, yeah, it's all for your consideration.
Great. Any further questions or discussions on this one item? If not, gonna take a
Mr.
moment.
Chair, sorry. There are water rights, environmental issues tied to this project, but I don't know if I would have enough details. That may be something you may just want to ask the applicant when they're here.
And in my mind, is my assumption, the authorization, once that's done, that's getting into the weeds a lot more than maybe I need to totally understand, because that's all going to have to be done before funds are committed.
Right.
And so I'm not too,
Okay.
personally I'm not, I don't know about the rest of the board, but personally addressing the authorization basically is looking at the money and saying this money is available, now meet all the requirements, and then we'll commit funds. So that's kind of how I personally view it. I want to take a moment and let the director take just a moment on an introduction.
Great, and I appreciate taking a pause. Aaron, if you'll bring Justine up. I apologize, I didn't get it in before we started that robust discussion.
No worries. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Aaron Austin. I'm our GIS manager. I lead our data and innovation section. Recently, a member of my staff, Tom Moore, was promoted and joined our hydrology and modeling section. And that put me in search of a new person for our section to do our water-related land use program. So I'm happy to introduce Justine Jedlicka as that new person.
Thank you. I am Justine Jedlicka. Very happy to be a part of Water Resources. As Aaron said, I'm doing the water-related land use program. Very excited about that as well. I have a longevity of natural resource experience with working with the Forest Service previously, the United States Forest Service previously, for 14 years. I've worked on a wide breadth of various natural resource projects. And I'm really excited to be working with water, as that's one of the most important resources that we have available.
Any questions?
Welcome.
We want to welcome you.
Great, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes. Glad you're on our team.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Tom, we're going to go back to you. You didn't get up out of your chair, so we're going to go to you.
I'm getting
Mr. Chair, this is Blaine. I assume that Spencer will make that motion,
Oh, thank you.
if any.
Thank you,
Yes.
Spencer.
And we can have numbers available for extended repayment periods if that's something the board would like, for like 35-year, 40-year.
Would you like, Mr. Chair, would you like those numbers to be calculated so we have them for you for the board meeting?
Chair, are we talking about the 40-year and the 0.5 interest? Is that?
Yes.
Potentially, or any
I
variation.
think
you'd
that's
Yeah,
a
like
good
to see.
idea. That
I think, yeah, if we
look
can
at
do
that.
that.
Okay. So 0.5 and 40 years?
Well, I think 35 and 40.
35 and
Both.
40?
I think for what it's worth, like I still need to wrap my head around all of the stuff and how I feel about all of it. But I think as long as we can I'm comfortable as long as we can tie it back to something we've done in the past. So if you can just remind us when you have those scenarios that this is similar to Provo. or
And Provo,
Metro,
the-
or- yeah.
In the case of Provo, the staff did recommend 1%, 30 years, and they requested 35 years, and the board approved that.
And we stayed at 1% on theirs.
Yes.
Tom, can you remind me, or Shalane, the board has made exceptions to their guidelines in the past, extending payment returns, decreasing interest rates. It might be helpful to have some examples for the board meeting of, we did this one to 40 years at whatever percent, or whatever examples you have.
And I think in doing that and looking at the lower interest rate, longer period of time, that affordability data has to be looked at as well, because if that drops us below what that threshold is, I guess that's a new consideration for me.
Okay, yeah, we can look at that.
Let's move to the next item on, we've got special items, RC 070. Tom, do you want to?
This is also a project being sponsored by the Washington County Water Conservancy District. This is a dam safety project for their Kolob Dam, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the freeway, 16 to 20 miles north of Springdale, Virgin area. It is rated high hazard and has deficiencies regarding its spillway, outlet, seepage, and stability issues that need to be addressed at some point. But in April of 2024, there were sinkholes found around the spillway, and so when they investigated, they found that the water had gotten underneath the spillway, and there was uplift, and it damaged the spillway, and the state engineer allowed them to operate that year and store water for this season, with the agreement that they would replace the spillway in calendar year 2025. So the district will be before the board today for committal of funds for that project. It'll be a $1.5 million project, and as standard, staff is recommending the board commit 80% of the project cost up to $1,200,000. That will be enough to cover the design and construction of the spillway project, plus a little bit extra to fund the engineering on the rest of the project. So the remaining deficiencies will be addressed at a different time. So that's staff's report.
Okay. Any questions pertaining to this project?
Mr. Chair, this is Blaine. Tom, would you mind just clarifying for us the difference between the 80% and why versus the 90% that we will do for the other type of dam safety grants? Could you just go through that, please?
Sure. Statute states the board will provide at least 80% grant towards high hazard dam safety upgrade projects. And typically the board has offered 80% for governmental entities and 90% for privately owned companies like irrigation companies. Just, I think it started so long ago, I wasn't around when they started that, but I think the thinking was that the governmental entities have a broader base on which to draw funds, so they can come up with a higher percentage for the local cost share.
Chair, I just had a question. So did the applicant ask for the 80, or did they ask for something different than the 80?
They haven't asked for anything different.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this project? If not, Councilmember Jones, is that something you can
Yes.
do the motion on? Thank you. And I didn't, are we going to have, is the applicant going to be here or online, or?
Zach Renstrom, the general manager, will be here, plus their financial officer and their financial advisor from Zions Bank. So we should have three individuals here.
Very good. Thank you so much. Okay. New applications. Thank you, Tom. We kind of beat you up a little bit, but it was all in love. New applications. We've got RE 498, RE 499. First one's Russell on the Veyo Irrigation Company. Any information we need on that? They're just applications at this point, and
Yes, Mr. Chair, just information for the board, and they'll be coming before you in future board meetings for authorization.
perfect. All right, and then WATERWISE plant sector application.
Yep, Candace Schaible will be presenting some information about the SELECTOR app, and yeah, excited to have
Okay.
her showcase that.
And she'll be here online?
She'll be virtually, yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, it looks like we're to the really interesting report now, Director. Please.
Yes, I will provide I won't make you listen to it twice, but I'll provide a full briefing of what our world has been like. This week has been a little crazy. I'll just preface that. I went to DC on Monday, and then Tuesday morning provided testimony at a congressional hearing on the Bureau of Reclamation's snow water supply forecasting program. So that was a really neat experience and first time. So I'll happily share more details with you about that when we get there. But yeah.
And I shook your hand, so that's really cool.
It was
cool
something.
before, but it is way
was,
more cool now.
It was something.
Okay, well, we don't have anything else on the, as a discussion. Is there anything else we need to discuss at this time?
Mr. Chair, I just have a few more items on information to the board if you guys are ready to move to that. Shalane, she's there and ready. She's going to provide a status of funds. And then we have a couple of ARPA fund updates and the high hazard dam FEMA funding update from Ben.
Perfect.
So we'll have those three go.
Yes, thank you. I will keep my status of funds short because it's a short agenda today. We've already had lots of discussion of the two projects being presented. It's interesting that the two projects being considered today are coming from special pots of money. I did want to point out, so there's not been any change in the revolving fund since last time. The dam safety project, I don't know if you noticed, but I wanted to point out, you might notice that Kolob's already got a contract in place for $700,000, and the amount I put in today is what we're requesting to be committed is $500,000, but Tom's actually asking you for $1.2 million. And I just wanted to reiterate that part of the reason for that is with the dam safety funds, the board instructed us years ago to enter into contracts to fund engineering and any preliminary studies and design that might need to be done before they can come up with an accurate cost estimate before we bring that project to you, so that you don't have to consider it and consider the funding requests multiple times. So we do these preliminary contracts, and then when we come to you for funding, we include that amount already contracted in what we ask you to commit. So since statute says you will fund at least 80% of a dam safety upgrade with a grant, as long as funds are available, that's the process that we follow. So we have actually already contracted for a portion of that money. After funds, if funds are committed today, we'll just do an amendment, but we'll get the full approval of the $1.2 million today. But you can still see, according to what's contracted and committed so far, we still have about $14 million available. Although after last month's report, you know that most of that is already specified for certain projects. And we'll talk more about the HHPD grants here in just a minute. Ben has a good update I think you'll appreciate. And then those $195 million funds transferred for the from the WIRA for the Colorado River reuse project. As you can see, we do currently only have $95 million in that fund. So this is overcommitting us by $100 million, but we know those funds have been appropriated by the legislature. We're coming up on July 1st when a new transfer of $50 million will happen. So even a week from now, we could probably tell you there's $145 million in there. And then next year would be another 50. And I've removed the city's water loan fund sheet and the ARPA sheets because the ARPA's all been contracted and there's been no change, except there will be. So, So let's talk about that now. Jim, if you'd like to join me. So there's been a lot of discussion because we got everything contracted. We did everything we were supposed to get those funds contracted before the end of the year. And then we've had a few more now. We've actually started to see some projects finish under budget and have money to return. So now what do we do? And these are very different funds than what we're used to using. So Jim has had a lot of conversations with the governor's office, so I'm going to let him speak specifically to that. I just wanted to let you know current status of projects that are finished that we know of. We have approximately $4 million available. We've apparently received word from another recipient that they might be returning as much as another $1 million. So we'll be working on a process of how we're going to get that back out. And so Jim's worked with the governor's office to figure out how we can do that.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm Jim Egbert. I'm the finance manager with Water Resources, and I thought in speaking with this, I thought I'd start with kind of a big picture of what's going on, not only within our division with secondary metering, but throughout the state. That'll kind of paint a picture for my discussion. So within the state, the governor's office is overseeing, administering nearly $1.4 billion worth of ARPA funds. So our portion of that within the division is roughly 20%. We've got $265 million for secondary metering. That's about 19% of the state's appropriated ARPA funds that we've received from the U.S. Treasury. And we've got an additional 15 or 16 million within the division for other grants for conservation and infrastructure projects that we're overseeing. So we're a pretty good share of the state's ARPA funds, 20% of that. This situation of needing to reallocate or reclassify funds isn't unique to us. Marisa and I participated in a conference call with the governor's office, probably roughly about a month or a month and a half ago, where the primary purpose of the meeting was to talk to agencies that are overseeing the distribution of these ARPA funds about compliance, complying with federal guidelines associated with the ARPA funding, and then also a progress of where the spending is. Now that we've gone through the contracting phase and obligated the funds, the emphasis is becoming on how are we going to get that money spent before the deadline. About a year ago, we heard quite a bit from the governor's office about where we were at with our contracting as we reached that December 31st, 2024 deadline for getting the funding obligated and contracted. Now the emphasis is playing out more also on where the spending's at, how we're looking now. They've set some goals and objectives for us. By June 30th, which is only a couple days away, but in accounting terms, it's still a month away as we close the books and get all the payments made. They're wanting agencies that oversee these funds to be 60% spent through their appropriated ARPA funding. And for secondary metering, that's kind of where Marisa and Shalane focus and work with you on getting things contracted. The spending part is where I'm spending more of my time reviewing and working with the project engineers as they review expenses and getting the payments made. So of the 265 million, we've spent about 153 million of it. We're roughly 58% through our secondary metering funding. We're in real good shape for that 60% goal and objective with the ARPA funds for secondary metering. Typically, if last fiscal year end is a judge of what this one will look like, we'll have quite a few, as we ask for the subrecipients and their subcontractors to get invoices into us, we'll see a big push of payments going out the door. It's probably another 6 million will get us to that 60%. So the governor's office isn't too worried about what's going on with secondary metering. But we do have these situations where, but they are worried and concerned about stuff that's going on elsewhere throughout the state. They didn't talk specifically about this, but I think by setting these goals of the 60%, they're mindful of knowing what do we need to do if a certain project's is coming in under budget or someone's backed out, things just aren't working out the way they were intended to. So we kind of got some specific information on how those plans would pertain to us. So we'll have situations, or we do have situations where some of our applicants or subrecipients have withdrawn. Either they've backed out of a project, or maybe there's been some kind of an exemption that's been put in place. That's one scenario. Those types of funds that come back that way, they can be reallocated, reclassified, or I guess reallocated is probably the better term to use, to any eligible project. So there's no, as we have an open enrollment, if we have applicants that put in that haven't applied for funding before, aren't under contract, we can use that money for them. Funds that are returned because of a closeout or because a project went under budget, that funding needs to be reclassified and reallocated to projects that are currently under contract. And we anticipate, in talking with Marissa and Shalane, we kind of anticipate that we'll have a mixture of water providers applying for another round of ARPA funding. So I think the gist of what Marissa got from that meeting is we've got enough flexibility to work with whatever scenario is going to play out here in the next couple months.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So I would just add that we will, I anticipate in August coming to you to ask you to set a new application period, because that's what we're going to have to do again. We're going to have another application period. And in order to, since the grant amounts, percentages of grant that can be offered in any year is reducing every year, I'd kind of like to get these reallocated or at least committed before the end of this year so we can get that 60% that is in statute for the current year. Next year it drops to 50. So I think we're going to try to get closeouts done as much as possible. Come to you in August, ask you during your board meeting to ask you to set a new application period so we can get any new or additional applications from those already working. I will say part of why we're doing pretty well with only having about 4 million available is as those exemptions and withdrawals have happened, we have already got those funds out the door. So there's probably a little less than 200,000 available from withdrawn funds. Everything else we managed to get out the door last year in those application periods. So the bulk of the 4 million, just slightly over 4 million that we have available is from closeouts, projects coming in under budget. So those funds will have to go to existing recipients. So there will probably be some criteria we'll ask you that you'll have to set to go along with this funding requirement for that next application period. But we're looking to get all this done before the end of the year, so so that we can get things spent by mid-October of next year, because that's the goal, or at least projects completed by mid-October of next year, so funds can be spent by the end of the year 2026.
Mr. Chair, if I might ask them, do you want to mention the Davis-Bacon information?
No.
I think that's important information for the board to have.
Jim, me. So when we originally got these funds, most of us remember being told that Davis-Bacon didn't apply to these ARPA funds. With the increased conversations with the governor's office in tracking the funding and the projects and the status, we've been informed that recipients of $10 million or more, which we have several, need to comply with the Davis-Bacon Act, which is wages.
That's what Mr. Chair, I was going to ask if just to clarify.
Yes,
what that act requires.
it's a standard, a federal standard for wages being paid.
But isn't it material as well?
Could be.
I think it's only wages.
Is it only wages?
I think so.
So we have notified our recipients that have $10 million or more of these requirements and are getting a lot of pushback because to them this is a new requirement. It's always been in the federal statute. We didn't have all the information at the beginning, so we're trying to get the information out to get compliance moving forward. That's what we're shooting for, is to get certified compliance moving forward.
So, Chair, I just had a question. How would this work as far as for their budget? So say it's a $11 million project, didn't figure prevailing wages, and now prevailing wages need to be paid, takes it to a
Yeah, they might need more
12,
money.
13, yeah.
Yeah, this could be part of the impetus for some of these applicants who weren't sure they could spend their money in time, that maybe it won't be a problem anymore. I don't know. What we're asking them to do, Jim, I'm asking Jim to convey this information to them, is they're being asked to work with their financial consultants, auditors, to ensure that they can meet those requirements. We do not want to be financial advisors for each individual entity. There aren't a lot of them. There are enough that it's a concern. So, thanks, Candace.
Thank you for that good news.
Okay, is that any questions then on the ARPA, or we'll just plan that moving forward? Okay, to Ben. Thank you, Jim.
So while Ben's coming up, I'll just remind you from our last board meeting, we had a pretty robust discussion on these high hazard dam safety grants that we got from FEMA, and Ben has went and done a lot of work since that board meeting and has a good update.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So yeah, the HHPD grant is progressing. I don't recall exactly where we were at last time, the last board meeting, but we have a few projects we have 4 projects which we're currently trying to get under contract. We have 2 additional projects which are still pending review with FEMA. And then we have 4 other projects which, if you recall, they are nonprofit 501c12 companies with the IRS. And because of their filing status with the IRS, we're required to have a government entity become the fiscal agent for the project in order to provide the financial and other expertise needed to administer these projects. And so we have been pursuing getting the counties on these projects on board, specifically Rich County, San Pete County, Summit County, and Salt Lake County. And we're making a lot of headway. We have a pending agreement with Rich County. I'm going to go present to them on July 2nd and hopefully get a contract signed for them to become a fiscal agent to the Birch Creek project. I went and with Tom Cox and Ethan Stainer, we went and met with Summit County this week, and they sounded like they were on board with this. I'm going to go present with Paul Willardson with JB Engineers probably on July 9th to their county council. That meeting is tentative at this point. And I'm also getting on the agenda to go and present to San Pete County for Rolfson Reservoir and hopefully get them on board with that project as well. And at this point, I'm still trying to get a hold of Salt Lake County, find out who the right individuals are to speak to that about that. But so far, if you recall, there was a lot of trepidation last time. We weren't sure whether this was going to work out, but it seems to be, all these counties seem to be really willing to work with us, which we're excited about. So, yeah, we got some presentations and county council meetings to attend coming up, and it looks like things are moving forward.
And could I chime in. I think the important note here is it's been determined that acting as fiscal agent doesn't mean they're taking the full liability of operation and maintenance and all of that. After
Right.
other meetings with FEMA, Ben's come to the understanding, and there have been conversations that no, that does not mean you're putting the county on the hook for everything involving the dam. It's a simple agreement to help administer the funding, but not take on, I know that was a big concern expressed last meeting, especially Blaine with that county and where the dam is and who they serve. But it doesn't mean they're taking on the full liability of a dam owner. They're simply helping act with these funds. So,
Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you. That's good news. Oh, Marisa? Are you there?
I am there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Mr. Chair and members of the board, I wanted to add my thoughts about the work that Ben has been doing. Ben took on this federal grant funding, and there's so much that we've learned about federal grant funding through ARPA that we had no idea. And apparently, as you know, Davis-Bacon, we're still kind of trying to scramble, and maybe this is a good heads up to Ben for the future. But Ben has really taken this and had to figure out how to make it work. And he's worked with Sarah, with our AG, with Jim, Egbert and his staff, Mariah, helping with contracts. And the meeting he went to Summit County, I asked Ethan, who accompanied him, about it, and he said, oh, it was a really cool meeting. There were 5 people from the county. There were a couple people from the irrigation company. You know, in my head, I was thinking he's going to go talk to some guy. And he's really done a good job setting up, you know, he's off doing what he needs to do and get things done, where we thought some of this funding would be lost without the help of the counties. Now, if the counties jump on, some of that money won't necessarily be lost to us. So I just really want to commend him having to just kind of figure out how to make this work. I've been in that situation before, and it can feel very lonely at times. And I'm really appreciative of him and everyone who's been working with him to help make this get figured out.
Thank you, Marisa.
Thank you. Just a couple other items for you. Let's have Sarah Schechter come up, our AG, to give a legal update on Great Salt Lake litigation.
Good morning. I'll be brief on this. At the middle of June, we filed our answer to the complaint. And the next steps are initial disclosures. We received the plaintiff's initial disclosures a couple of days ago. Ours are due in a couple weeks. And the AG's office has retained an outside counsel, an outside firm, to assist us with the document production. These private firms have more ability to manage documents than we do, and given our staff resources, we need the help, all the help we can get. So that's what we're working on now, and that's all the update I have, but I'm happy to answer questions.
How long do you anticipate the document production will take?
Well, they're due in 40 days, so 40 days at least.
Okay. And what about discovery after that?
After that, then we will enter to discovery phase. I'm anticipating depositions will probably take place, and we may have to do some expert discovery as well. I think there's a lot of questions about impacts to wildlife, brine shrimp, salinity, all of those technical issues that the Great Salt Lake includes. It'll be interesting to see where the plaintiffs want to head. And once we get into discovery, we may have to do some meetings offline with the board to discuss legal strategy if we need to do that. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, now I'm giving Eric the sign of making it short. We have an update for you on the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan and kind of really the next big piece of that, which is developing relevant agency plans. Eric has a presentation for you, and we'll go through what we've been working on.
Get this pulled up quick. Glad to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Like Candace said, I'll just give a brief overview of the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan, where we're at, and a couple of key components that we're at right now. Just kind of as a review, it's all kind of tied in with the Water Development Coordinating Council. These are the organizations that have a member on that council. The Water Conservancy District was one that was added as part of HB 280 back in 2024, and it's Washington County was the one that was appointed by the governor to be on that council. Here's a timeline. You know, some stuff was back in 2024. We're right in the middle of 2025. You are here. The big thing that we're kind of focused on right now is this agency plans. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about those later on in the presentation, what they include and what the purpose of them is. And then you can see the other items that are coming up. The goal is to have everything ready for that Unified Water Infrastructure Plan next March. And the things that I talked to today are kind of main components that tie into that. So again, there are two things I'll be talking about in the rest of the slides. One is the technical memorandum. This was prepared by our consulting engineering group, which is a team of Bowen Collins Associates and Brown and Caldwell. And this technical memorandum was kind of worked on with the WDCC, and then also there's what's called the relevant agencies, and those are the three that you see the pictures there for water resources, water quality, and drinking water. As we looked at the funding that each of the different organizations had, because there are more on the WDCC, but the others, as we looked at the funds, is like, that doesn't really apply here. These are the three agencies that are going to be pulling their money, some of their monies into the water infrastructure funds. And so those are the ones that will be looking at the projects that come in. And that technical memorandum is kind of, as I go through it, I'm going to just get to them instead of cover too much here. So it's kind of give some guidance for the prioritization and the ranking process. I just listed a few here, but there was like 29 cells that they have to, or as they filled out the spreadsheet for their projects that they put in, and then we used those to kind of evaluate. Looking at HB 280, it said that there has to be these minimum things you have to look at, or add other things that the council comes up with, and so there's those different categories of the things that they had to fill out. And then the technical memorandum also kind of then lays out, these are the items that we looked at, and use this multi-criteria decision analysis to kind of rank the different projects based on some weighted scores. Worked with the council and the members on the team helping with the putting the plans together. And those plans and the prioritization from those agency plans, the relevant agency plans, are what will be the basis for the UWIP. So again, this technical memorandum initially is given the information for the agency plans, but then will also, the majority of it and a lot of the information provided in it will also be applied to the UWIP. And it kind of came up to, after we looked at everything, these are the criteria we came up with. As you saw, the due date is June 30th for these agency plans. So we got plenty of time, you know, or that's not till next Monday. This is kind of, we're locking in on these weighted values based on, we had all the different team members look at things and kind of give their independent reviews, and then kind of pulled these together. And I won't go through what all these criteria are. You can, just from the wording of them, you kind of get a good feel for what these were based on. And so every project was then ranked or given a score for each one of these criteria, and then a total score was put together. Now this is in the technical memorandum. You can't really read it here, but this just kind of show that we have a process put together, which involves the water entities for when they submit their information, the council, and then the 3 relevant agencies with the different parts and pieces that they have as it goes through this process. And we'll make these, you know, we have this technical memorandum that we'll make available to you guys to look at, and the plan once we have it finalized, which we're getting close to getting that wrapped up here. And this just kind of focuses in on the prioritization process in that previous flow chart. I'll let you kind of read through those, but basically, you know, they submit the information and it gets evaluated, gets some ranking, and then the relevant agencies, if they feel, when they get the information with the different rankings, they can decide if there's some information that they have that might need to be tweaked, because this provisional score is basically just thrown in the computer with the information they submitted, and it comes out with a score. And you know, looking at it, we kind of did some looking at it over the last few weeks, because the projects were submitted in April and in early May. And so we've had some time to look at it and come up with, we've looked at it and felt like they're pretty good. You know, looking at the scores that were just automated, but we have the next few days if there are any changes that are needed. And then that's all used to determine where the WCC will get all those to put into the UWIP, and then determine where the money is needed from this water infrastructure funds. The council can then say, you know, we're going to allocate the money to these parts, and these agencies might need more for what the projects they have, depending on the year. And then it's also the source for knowing if they need to go to legislature and say, you know, we need a lot more money, or we need to do something to get some more money with what's coming up. So the agency plans, it takes that information from the technical memorandum. This just kind of outlines what is in the agency plan. That small community plan is a section in those plans. Just kind of, a lot of small communities don't have the analysis completed, you know, the forecasts and the projections and the things. So we've got some plans in there for how to account for that, to say that some money is needed for these smaller communities that we know are going to be coming for some money, but they don't have a 20, 30-year plan to really have that laid out yet. Of all the projects that were submitted, we kind of looked at, you know, there's drinking water and water quality. These are the 3 that were assigned to the Water Resources, which are typically the majority of the things that the board would provide funding for. The off-farm, you know, getting all the pipelines and canals and that would get it to the farms. Secondary water, we know there's a lot of stuff going on with all the stuff that we already talked about earlier. And then water supply. And in the agency plan, we basically just looked at the next 5 years. We have everything, there's a 1 and 2 year breakout, and then a 3 to 5 year breakout. And as I get to some numbers later on, you'll see why we kind of limited it to 5, because there was a lot of information, thousands of projects that were submitted. And that's what this is kind of showing. Don't worry about the colors are what are important, and this is also stuff that will be in other information provided, so you can see the more detail. But the orange is water resources. Those top bars are showing the number of projects that were submitted, and this is for the whole 21 year plus. 3664 submitted, 255 entities. So we know there's a lot more out there that wasn't submitted. We put stuff out to thousands of entities, and we got 255 entities. You know, some have up to, one of the entities submitted 550 projects, and then there's a lot with just one project. So we got a nice range there, but we know there's more that's going to be coming in. And these that were submitted this first round were 17.56 billion. It's kind of weird that we're just talking about billions all over the place here today. And then the based on what they submitted, the state funding that they'll be requested for that total is 5.76. And I pulled in some information for just, it's not shown on here, broken out. You can see, like I said, this orange for the 1 and the 2 plus the 3 and the 5 years. That's what is kind of summarized in the agency plan that you'll be able to see when it's finalized. But in that, for the water resources, we have 260 projects, which is the total of the project cost is right around $1 billion, with estimates of about $380 million is what they're going to be coming for state funding for projects over the next 5 years. And a lot of details are still getting worked out. This is the guinea pig year of figuring out how it's going to work and all these things. So, just again, back to here, that red thing has now moved up 5 minutes. But we've got the plan that we'll be getting finalized here by end of Monday. Then we'll be getting that submitted to the WDCC, and we'll get copies of you guys to look at and review and get your comments too, because we want you guys' input on, because it does tie into the projects that will be coming for funding in the long term. And any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Eric. I would just add, those are some pretty big numbers, and the goal is that this process allows for there to be more money available. So this is not just looking at existing state funds. This is looking at potential new appropriations from the legislature, as well as the fee study. And so I was just thinking, Shalane, we should probably give an update at the August board meeting on the fee study and kind of where that's at. But that's also another piece of it.
Thank you.
Okay, real quick, I know we're at the end of our meeting. Have a board tour and update, and while Shalane's coming up there, I would also note that Michael Sanchez is here and has the photo area set up for additional photos. So if you haven't had your photo taken or you want a new photo, Juliet, he said it's been a couple of years since you and I have done a photo, that we can get new photos if we want.
Okay, I'll keep this real quick. I just wanted to remind you all that August is our next board meeting, the 21st. The 20th is the board tour. For those who may not recall, we discussed where we would have this and decided we would stick to this area so we could see some of the things that might be subject to aqueduct resilience, some of these earthquake mitigation projects that it might be coming up in the future, other things in the area. So we'll be staying in the area. However, we still wanted to kind of get you out of this building, since that's usually one of the goals for the board tour and board meeting, is to not just be sitting here at the Department of Natural Resources. So we've actually planned to hold the board meeting at Jordan Valley's Education Center with their conservation garden park. So we'll be off-site. We'll book a hotel for you all, probably in the southern part of the valley, near the point of the mountain where we can see earthquake-prone projects and other things in the Salt Lake Valley. And even though we're here, we won't be here. So make sure you have that on your calendars. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalane. And Mr. Chair and members of the board, that's all we have for you for the briefing meeting.
Oh, sorry. Look for a motion to adjourn until 1 p.m. for our regular
Also
meeting.
move.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.